Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Father and Co-Inspiration Camp Venture, John Lukens.
Hello, Venture family. This is the story of Venture. It is our story. It began in the 1960s. It was a time when people confronted power to gain civil rights, to gain women's rights. It was a time of demonstrations and youth protest. Here in Rockland became a time for another struggle, one for the rights of the mentally handicapped. A mother of 5 children, one an autistic son, came forth in the company of other mothers to confront the educational establishment and to demand for them a place in our schools, a place among children, a place in the sun. This woman was Kathy Lukens. She was a mother, and she led what was to become a movement. A camp was created. It began with optimism and a spirit of volunteerism. What it lacked in professionalism, it made up in enthusiasm. It was a place in the sun for our children. If Willowbrook raised the concern of the public, it raised fear in the hearts of Venture people. Was this to be their future for the children? But Camp Venture was gaining favor with the people of Rockland and its officials. One such official was John Murphy, a man with a lifetime concern for handicapped people. He joined Kathy and the Venture board and became its president. A team was forged. With John's political power, the county formed a child advocacy council, the first of its kind. Kathy was its president. A young attorney named Charles Davis became part of a triumvirate, which was to give a strong voice to the rights of the handicapped. Kathleen's advocacy extended to high levels of power. She confronted Governor Rockefeller in Albany about the shocking conditions at Letchworth Village. In his embarrassment, Rockefeller ordered that more staff be added. It was too little and too late. Our state assemblyman, Gene Levy, whose help made Camp Venture possible, visited Letchworth, and so did Kathy. She was led on a tour by the director, Dr. Wolanski. He showed her rooms with rows of beds and silent, vacant-eyed people staring from them. Dr. Wolanski said to her in a sad voice, "It didn't have to be this way. Many of these same people walked into Letchworth." Kathy said of this encounter, "These too are our people." She was determined to act. John Murphy joined her in the effort to create a hostel, another first, and so did Charles Davis and an enlightened supervisor of Clarkstown, George Gerber. Sister Helen Murphy and the Sisters of Charity contributed the land on the St. Agatha property. The ground was broken. Venture Inn became a reality. The new residents arrived, some with sad stories of the world they had left behind. One woman came into Kathy's office and shouted, "Look, I have new shoes. I never had 2 pairs of shoes." A man interviewed at Letchworth was asked, "How many people sleep in your room?" "No people," he mumbled. The interviewer repeated the question, and the answer was the same, "No people." The Letchworth social worker intervened and said, "Ask how many boys are in the room. Staff are the people, the residents are the boys." "No people in my room, just boys," our new Venture person mumbled. He was 40 years old. Other stories were too dark to tell.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Father and Vice President, ABC TV International News, Paul R. Dolan.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today for this celebration with the friends and families of Venture. And it's hard for me to imagine that 40 years ago, I was 17 and a high school student volunteering at a summer camp for people with special needs called One-to-One. And at that time, parents had few choices, and summer camps were a wonderful place. So we begin by celebrating that Camp Venture was created. But 40 years ago, there were no community family-like homes, only institutions. And in college, I worked as an attendant at one of the institutions. and I saw for myself the lack of human respect and personal care that happens when people live in large, impersonal settings. So I was very lucky to be there at the beginning of a radical change, a change from the institutions to community living, and a change that Camp Venture and Venture Inn made possible. Imagine how terrible it would be if Rockland County did not have Venture and the vision and the imagination it created. After college, I went to work in a small foundation at ABC Television that became known as 121. And here in New York, our New York station WABC, reporter Geraldo Rivera did a risky thing by bringing cameras secretly into one of the biggest and worst institutions, Willowbrook, and then here to Letchworth in Rockland County. And you've all seen the pictures, and many of you know personally the tragedy. But there was something very positive that happened, and it happened right here in Rockland County that we celebrate today. Parents, activists, citizens, responsible community and political leaders came together. New York City, another passionate advocate, did something positive. Musician John Lennon sold out 2 benefit concerts to raise funds to build group homes, to get people out of Willowbrook and to get people out of Letchworth Village. With all his talent, John Lennon could not build houses. It takes local action and organizers. When I first met Kathy Lukens, I knew I was meeting a woman of action. Together, John Murphy, Kathy, her husband, son, and a dedicated team, many of you here, put together more than the first group home. You built a model for the rest of the United States and for all of New York. With John Lennon's money, I was pleased to be able to provide some of the first funding to help Kathy and help Venture Inn. And I remember what a strong advocate Kathy was. She knew how to fight when the cause was right and how to work well with so many people.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President Camp Venture, John Murphy.
The American community rejoiced in 1979 as the hostages were released from Iran and were returned to their country. So too, more and more people were released from the captivity of institution life. But the receptions in our neighborhoods for those people were not joyful. The good feeling that accompanied our camp for handicapped children was not to be seen in the crowds that protested Venture's efforts to house more in need of our efforts. The reaction was called NIMBY, not in my backyard. The public was frightened, and so were some of our political leaders. But brave political figures like then State Assemblyman Gene Levy stood with us, and an independent-minded editor and publisher lent Venture and its work on behalf of all people its first and
Ladies
continuing
and
support.
Please welcome
He
journalist,
is Arthur
publisher.
Aldridge.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome journalist, publisher, and editor Arthur R. Aldridge.
The 1960s, for those old enough to remember, were a time of cataclysmic change and social upheaval. Peace and love was the mantra, even chanted by the radical groups that burned buildings and planted bombs. So was the slogan, power to the people, but which people? Certainly not those locked away in institutions like Letchworth Village. The community residences were the only logical and practical alternative to mass institutionalization when Letchworth and Willowbrook emptied out. But the image created by words like inmate, mentally defective, feeble-minded were hard to erase. Legislation can change policy, but only knowledge and understanding and acceptance can change culture and public attitudes. The concept of community residences in 1969 was radical but perfectly logical. The challenge was to overcome attitudes and create a culture of acceptance instead of a culture of rejection. We found out how hard this change was to bring about when the first group home in Rockland was established in South Nyack in January of 1974. James Naismith, a professor at Rockland Community College, and his wife, had heard that Miss Bailey's nursery school next door was to become a community residence set up by St. Agatha's for 9 young people from Letchworth. As many as 60 children had played each day when the old house had been Miss Bailey's nursery school, and the neighborhood was considered child-safe and child-friendly, but not for the developmentally disabled. Opposition formed quickly, led by Village Mayor Louis Denegris, who insisted he was only trying to uphold building and zoning ordinances by keeping the developmentally disabled citizens out. He wanted to send them back to Letchworth. The group of advocates was legislator John Murphy, then in his first term, who risked his entire political career by sponsoring laws to enable the developmentally disabled to live in Rockland County. I wrote that story. It was one of my first as editor of a new newspaper, Our Town, which I started in 1973. Murphy told me that a large mob had turned out in Ramapo, and that he and his community residents advocates were chased out of town. That was the community response to community residences. And that was to continue through the 1970s and 1980s until, thanks to the efforts of venture ARC advocates, thanks to people like Kathy Lukens, John Murphy, and Charlie Davis, as well as changes in the law, the developmentally disabled could emerge from the dark ages and take their rightful place in the sunshine of full citizenship and recognition of their worth, dignity, and value as human beings.